Abraham Lincoln is perhaps the most familiar of American heroes, holding our nation together during Civil War and setting social change. Alright, Mr. Hassan, we just want to let you know, no disrespect or anything, but you ain't got nothing on my man Abe Lincoln, right? 76 years ago, Abraham Lincoln gave the Gettysburg Address. The speech lasted a mere 2 minutes, but was dedicated to the Gettysburg National Cemetery.
The Civil War saw more than 7,500 Americans die between July 1st and July 3rd, 1863 at the Battle of Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. According to the book, The Long Road to Gettysburg, the governor of Pennsylvania at the time authorized the purchase of the land in order to create a final resting place for these soldiers. According to the Library of Congress website, accessed November 25, 2009, Abraham Lincoln was the second speaker at the dedication of the Soldiers' National Cemetery in Gettysburg. Lincoln was preceded at the podium by the famed orator Edward Everett. Edward Everett spent 2 hours providing a speech to the dedication. Lincoln followed with a 2-minute speech, the Gettysburg Address. On November 20th, Everett wrote to Lincoln complimenting him. Everett stated that Lincoln spoke with such eloquent simplicity and appropriateness. And he went on to say, "I should be glad if I could flatter myself that I came as near to the central idea of the occasion in 2 hours as Lincoln did in 2 minutes."
Abraham Lincoln is perhaps the most familiar of American heroes, holding our nation together during the Civil War and social change. First, Rusty will review some information about Abraham Lincoln. Second, Alex will talk about the significance of the Gettysburg Address. Third, Rusty and I will look at how Lincoln addressed his specific audience. And then finally, I will talk about how Lincoln inspired us. First, Rusty will review some information about the presidency of Abraham Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln became the 16th President of the United States in 1861, serving from 1861 through his assassination in 1865. Lincoln led our nation through its most difficult internal crisis, the American Civil War. Upon the announcement of Lincoln winning the 1860 election, several of the southern states seceded from the Union. Lincoln, along with Republican politicians, believed that they could come to a peaceful solution for this. However, in April 1861, fighting began when the Confederate States of America attacked U.S. soldiers at Fort Sumter. The war took up the majority of Abe Lincoln's time. In September 1862, Lincoln announced the Emancipation Proclamation. This Emancipation Proclamation outlawed slavery, freeing over 3 million people. According to the letter that Lincoln wrote to Albert G. Hodges, Lincoln stated, "I never in my life felt more certain that I was doing right than I do in signing this document." The war saw over 620,000 deaths. The high death rates triggered the enactment of a draft, and by 1863, drafts had become very unpopular with the U.S. citizens. Hatred for Lincoln grew, and heading into an election year, Lincoln was concerned with keeping the Union spirit with the war. Lincoln used the Gettysburg Address to achieve this. In 1864, Lincoln was reelected. During Lincoln's second term as president in April 1865, Lincoln spoke on giving further benefits to the now freed black slaves. According to the book Lincoln of Kentucky by Lowell Hayes Harrison, published in 2000, John Wilkes Booth was not happy with the president and had plans on kidnapping the president in exchange for the freedom of Confederate soldiers. However, after Lincoln announced his plan to roll out further civil rights benefits to the now free black slaves, John Wilkes Booth changed his mind and decided to assassinate the president. On April 14, 1865, John Wilkes Booth carried out his plans and assassinated the president at point-blank range. Lincoln was the first U.S. president to be assassinated. So now that we've gone over a little bit about the presidency of Abraham Lincoln, Alex is going to go over the specific speech, the Gettysburg Address.
Abraham Lincoln's speech, the Gettysburg Address, is one of the most significant speeches in American history. I will now recite the Gettysburg Address. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. We are engaged in a great civil war. testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who have gave their lives that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, and we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little know, nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished business, or the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that the government of the people for the people shall not perish from the earth. The Gettysburg Address was given on November 19, 1863. According to Archimag Publishing, Lincoln invoked the principles of human equality, espoused by the Declaration of Independence, and it refined the Civil War as a struggle not merely for the Union, but as a new birth of freedom that would bring true equality to all citizens. So what this means is, when there's a struggle, you forget what you're fighting for. Lincoln also reminded us our founding fathers had written in the Declaration of Independence, our freedom. According to the Library of Congress, the speaker before Lincoln, Edward Everett, was one of the most popular orators of his day. Everett spoke for 2 hours, yet he admitted to Lincoln, "I wish I could flatter myself that I had come as near to the central idea of the occasion in 2 hours as you did in 2 minutes."